A Question of Doubt, Chapter 5, The News Media. Magazines, radio, television, newspapers. Our news medium spectrum do a landslide business by churning out their major wares. Scandals, crime, sex, corruption, violence. Sports, human interest stories, optimism, the funnies, are merely byproducts for most readers. It's the rough stuff that sells the lingerie at Fields and the automobiles at Honest Harry's GM dealership. That's the business the media is in above all else. And most people read the daily paper and listen to the unctuous TV anchor with the believability one generally reserves for Encyclopedia Britannica. The news media is influential and should therefore be held accountable for integrity. I appeared in the newspapers many times from high school years on up, winning American Legion Awards, speech contests, Gacy Awards, Civic Awards, Man of the Year, chairing community projects. When I lived in cities smaller than Chicago, the news articles seemed large. Of course, they really weren't, but the formats made it appear so in those areas. Vest pocket articles of praise and cameo photos of me were more than satisfying. Maybe the small paragraphs about me were exaggerated with good intention. It was later that I got my initiation into how the press works, big city style. Starting on December 23rd, 1978, a flood of coverage toward the making of a notorious criminal began. The media didn't have to know much in the way of facts, only that the police were holding a man who owned a house in Chicago, in a Chicago suburb where they had uncovered some bodies. Headlines followed. Dig for bodies at suburb site. Sex criminal hints 20 slain. Chicago Sun-Times, 12/23/78. Not to be outdone, the Chicago Tribune screamed, "Bodies of 3 teens found. 29 more fierce slain." 12/23/78. Stories followed under massive headlines. Police quizzing suburbanite, alongside Gacy fond of playing a clown. By this strategy of juxtaposing one story with another, I was made guilty in the mind of the public immediately. No iota of evidence or single fact was sought in reference to me by the Chicago newspapers. They accepted leaks by minor policemen and insignificant associates who had eavesdropped to pick up the insubstantial information that always surrounds the first waves of a sensational case. Each newspaper had its sources, but no scruples about accuracy. Only a need to scoop the other. Information gaps were filled by overzealous reporters creating bizarre, inflammatory stories out of whole cloth. A creative writing class eager for bylines. This continued for 30 days. In the first 72 hours, there were 29 different headlines and attendant stories, none of which were accurate. My rights were notoriously trampled. The members of the media felt the rush and the power of being able to stir into a frenzy not only the city of Chicago, but the state, the nation, many countries. They rose from the authorship of trite columns that sold lingerie and automobiles for their advertisers to the authorship of stories designed to shock their readers into a frenzied addiction for more detail. Spine-tingling sex and the graphics of murder were supplied a ravenous public for months. My fate was sealed by journalistic innuendo founded on speculation and imagination gone wild. The media was able to cast a die and stamp it upon the collective mind of its readers. Okay, so the beginning of chapter 5 starts on what is numbered page 89, and then this copy of the book I have is missing page 90. So that previous statement doesn't get to completely end. And then I don't know what page 90 might have talked about, but page 91 starts off with what says, I assume the previous word was professional. And so it says professional reputation were offhandedly disregarded. And, I mean, we're about 100 pages into this book, or what would have been 100 pages into it. And I don't think I really need to tell you that I'm pretty sure page 90 would have just been more of John Wayne Gacy acting like he didn't murder people, despite the fact he had like 30 people dead under his fucking basement. This book is so fucking stupid. So anyway, here's page 91 in chapter 5. And this is, I just want to say also, I guess you would say, tipping point in the book, where whoever scanned this and uploaded it, I don't know why they were missing certain pages, but this PDF starts to purposely or maybe unintentionally omit pages. So anyway, here is the rest of chapter 5, page 91. It wasn't just the stories picked up from leaks by the sheriff's office, the Des Plaines Police Department, and the state's attorney's office that molded the mind of the public. There were also people who would say anything to be recognized for the first time in their lives. People who wanted to feel important. A barber on Montrose Avenue in Chicago gave the story to the newspapers that John Gacy had come into his shop every week to get his hair trimmed and talk politics. Had seemed very strange, and when leaving, always left a $5 tip. Which, once again, for context, 1978, $5 was a lot of money. Now, you would think that with a little checking that the story might have been verified or dismissed. For the past 7 years, I had gone to a barber located next to Democratic headquarters in Norwich. I never paid $5 for a haircut in my life, let alone left a $5 tip. But the newspapers printed the story as truth. Another story claimed that I had picked up two 18-year-old hitchhikers on Interstate 55 in September of 1978, drove them to a wooded area, and physically attacked them. Printed as fact in the newspapers, the story was never investigated by the media. I was in Little Rock, remodeling a drugstore at that time. Not only does the employee who went with me verify this, but also the owner of the drugstore, and I have the airline ticket stubs and my PDM business records for further proof. Others said that I approached them, driving my big black Oldsmobile with the two spotlights, one red, one white, during the summer of 1978. The only problem with that is that car was a 1979 model, and I took delivery from the dealership at the end of October of 1978. By the end of December, the newspapers had made me as notorious as John Dillinger and Al Capone put together. So naturally, the radio and television talk shows, the magazines, and the rest got on the bandwagon. Books were written about me by people who never met me, books composed of newspaper articles and police leaks. People who had never met me gave me their insights about me, recalled mannerisms which now were divined into idiosyncratic. Former employees said that I had made sexual overtures to them. Why, then, did they continue to work for me? According to the Sun-Times, one claimed that on a night in June 1975, I had propositioned him. The story failed to mention that he worked for me for 2 years after that date. 4 years later, he came forth with the story. Credible? On January 3, 1975, the Tribune reported a young man's claim that he was attacked by Gacy and a second man. Since this story didn't fit the state's case, they quickly reacted with, "Police do not believe Gacy had an accomplice in the multiple killings linked to him." During the year before the trial, all of 1979, there were 146 separate stories in the Tribune and Sun-Times about John Wayne Gacy. There were 19 half-hour television programs with John Wayne Gacy as the topic. There were 29 articles in every kind of magazine you can think of, from Time, Newsweek, Christian Science Monitor, Life, all the way to Hustler and Playboy, all founded on the inaccuracies created by the Chicago newspapers. There were 16 hardbound or pocket books that mentioned John Wayne Gacy, others with 1 or 2 chapters on him. A 45 RPM record was cut with 2 songs about John Wayne Gacy. Finally, in the area of books, a different aspect of media, which also molds many minds, 2 hardbound books about me were published before I was convicted. In the first one, 29 Below, by Jeff Rignall and Ron Wilder, Wellington Press, 1979, Rignall claimed he was the last living victim, having been attacked by me and another man. I know no one named Jeff Rignall. Apparently, he has never been in my home. Quoting from the book, page 70, Jeff blinked his eyes several times to make sure he was really awake, and tried to move his arms and legs just slightly. He was regaining control of himself. He could see that he was in some kind of family room. He noticed a short flight of stairs at one end with a door above it. Rignall could not have been in my family room. There were no stairs. That house was ranch style, built on 1 level. He goes on to say, there was a sort of early American Danish bookcase and a couple of chairs. There were no bookcases in the room. Then he writes, the couch Jeff was lying on was lumpy, and the material was scratchy and worn. The only couch in the family room at my house was made of dark brown, smooth leather. Again, the main object in the picture was outlined with twinkling lights, the kind you see everywhere at Christmas. All the pictures hanging on the walls throughout the house were oil paintings, and none of them had any lights on them. The man made up this story. None of those paintings were found in my home. On page 75, he states he could see the light fixture that he thought must be somewhere in the middle of the kitchen. There were no light fixtures in the kitchen. Both lights in my kitchen were flush recessed. It cannot be seen unless you are standing in the kitchen. Even the description of the outside of the property is wrong. There was an old-fashioned metal steel light on the property in front of the house, and the railing near the doorway had a decorative curlicue trim. Pages 193 to 194. There were no railings on the house at all during the 7 years I lived there. A small wire fence that seemed to serve mostly as a decoration surrounds the yard. Once again, he's wrong. The main part of the front yard was made up of the circular driveway, trimmed with railroad ties and large stones. There was no wire fence anywhere on the front yard of the place. For a man with so many claims against me, he certainly doesn't remember where he was. and from his errors one cannot believe he was attacked by me in my house. Throughout his book is found one fabrication after another. Nothing in it even resembles the truth. Yet it was published. It was read. The public and the press ate it up as true and factual. Just before the trial, another book was published, The Man Who Killed Boys, claiming to be the true story of mass murderer John Wayne Gacy by Clifford L. Leyendecker. St. Mary's Press, 1980. The book seems to be based on stories from the newspapers and other media, with little research. Simple facts that could easily have been checked out never were. The book was rushed off the presses, intended to come out just before the trial to make a buck, with no regard for the people involved. Excerpt from Leyendecker's book, page 18. The first high school he attended was Carl Schurz, a huge co-educational school on the far north side. At Schurz, Johnny Gacy was no more and no less noticeable than any other student. He was never one of the popular boys. Nevertheless, he made friends and he got along well enough with his schoolmates to earn a reputation as a generally easygoing young man. Although later he told his first wife that he was taken out of school in a straitjacket a couple of times after flying into uncontrollable rages. Had Leyendecker done any research, he would have found that I had never gone to Carl Schurz High School, and never was, nor did I claim to have been, taken out of any school in a straitjacket. Further down the same page, talking about my first wife, even though they dated only once when they were both 16, she remembered his neatness. She was a student at Schurz, and he had just transferred from there to Providence St. Mel High School. Wrong again. Neither of my two wives were my age. I was older than both of them. My first wife never attended Schurz or any other school in Chicago, and I never attended Providence St. Mel. Moving on to page 44, but all other recognition was eclipsed when he finally realized his goal of leading a chapter of the Jaycees. He was elected president at Anamosa. In all my years in the Jaycees, I never held the office of president, or at Anamosa or anywhere else. A simple fact that could have been checked out had the author done any research. It is not my intention to nitpick through the books written by opportunistic men. I'm attempting to show that no judge or jury anywhere in Illinois could have claimed immunity to those infectious writings. Some of the writings were more damaging than others. On page 53, Leyendecker writes, on February 12, 1971, John Wayne Gacy Jr. was charged by Chicago police with disorderly conduct on the complaint of a teenage boy. The youngster, an admitted homosexual, said he was picked up at the bus terminal by Gacy, who then took him to his home and tried to force him to commit a sexual act. The case was dismissed when the boy failed to appear in court. The youngster was 18 years old and had a police record. According to a statement by an Albany Park, Chicago police detective, this is what happened. Gacy, while driving his car, stopped for a light at LaSalle and Randolph, picked up a hitchhiker claiming to be cold. While in the car, driving down Kennedy Expressway, the young man propositioned Gacy to give him a blowjob for $10, or he could get him an 8-track tape deck for his car for $10, plus letting him give Gacy the blowjob. Gacy stopped his car on the expressway at the North Avenue exit, got out, went around to the passenger side, opened the door, pulled the guy out, and threw him over the guard railing. got back in, and drove home, where he was arrested some 5 hours later by us. The detective said he then went to the address where the man had told me he had the tape decks and found a bunch of stolen items. The 18-year-old was charged with theft, and the charges against me were never prosecuted. This is a matter of police record. My parole officer, Mr. Lunt, attested to these facts and my innocence. Because of all the publicity before the trial, it was open season for any irresponsible writer to make false statements about my character. They went unchallenged. What are my feelings? There has been so much written about me, it would take years to undo a fraction of the harm that has been done to me. 80% of what has been written about me and my family is false or taken out of context and used by mercenaries. The search for truth was mismatched with a frenzy of greed and professional aggrandizement. The latter prevailed.